I'm going to read a short section from Houdini's Principle. You listening? When you finished up the invoice for the chapel installation, please stop by my office, Mr. Radwell had said. Derek Matheson was still replaying these words over and over as his finger hovered over the mouse button, the cursor positioned above the print icon. The invoice was done. He double-checked it as he normally did. Then he'd triple-checked it and got himself another coffee, his 10th today. After checking over everything a fourth time, he'd gone to the bathroom to empty his bladder of the 7th, 8th, and 9th coffees of the day. With those out of the way, he was back staring at the finished invoice, mouse pointer still on the print button. Jack from marketing popped his head over the cubicle, and Derek let his hand slide off his mouse, relieved by something he'd usually see as an unwanted interruption to his workday. Wasn't it mild last night? All that rain would probably have been another 12 inches of snow if it wasn't for... Jack droned on, and Derek let his ears tune him out. For a few months now there had been talk of downsizing. A handful of new startups in the audio and visual system installation business had quickly made names for themselves, and suddenly it was harder and harder to land good contracts. He glanced at the photo of his wife, Linda, and their daughters, Sophia and Lita. If the company was still bringing in new clients, those jobs weren't finding their way to Derek's desk. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been asked to design a setup for a fresh client. Had his bosses found that job advertisement he'd printed out and ended up stuffing into his drawer? He'd fantasized about quitting to pursue it. Perhaps that fantasy was about to cost him his job. While lost in thought, Derek hadn't noticed Jack disappear back into his own cubicle. The mouse cursor still hovered over the print button on the invoice. What if he wasn't being considered for termination? If he stalled much longer and didn't hand it over to Radwell, this could make them reconsider that. Begrudgingly, his arm lifted itself up from his side, and his fingers gripped around the mouse. With a single click, the invoice was sent to the printer on his desk. The first page wasn't halfway done printing when the status light started blinking red to indicate it was out of paper. He could ask to borrow a few pages from someone else, but that seemed like accepting his fate, as if he'd only need a few more pages. Stop acting so paranoid, Derek quietly told himself, getting up to go to the supply closet to get another ream. 5 minutes later, Mr. Radwell stepped into the break room and found Derek nervously eating a Snickers. An unopened ream of paper sat in his lap. Panicking, Derek told a stupid lie. My blood sugar levels were dangerously low. He stammered, only half aware of what he was doing. I left my insulin pen at home and didn't want to have a diabetes attack. His mind raced. Was that the right phrase? Did people with diabetes have attacks? Get that invoice done, Radwell said sternly. Rushing back to his desk, Derek tore open the ream of paper and slid it into the printer. While the remaining pages of the invoice were printing out, he quickly opened a web browser and pulled up the Wikipedia page on diabetes. There was no such thing as a diabetes attack. Shit, he quietly muttered, gathering the papers and then taking them over to the billing department. Shannon wasn't there, so he dropped the invoice on her desk and then slowly made his way towards Radwell's office. His heart thumping louder and louder with each step, Derek started crunching numbers. With his wife Linda's income, if they cut all the non-essentials, he'd need to be bringing home at least $2,000 a month in order to cover the mortgage and the remaining bills. They had at least $10,000 in savings before they'd need to start piling up credit card debts. So, if they tightened their belts right away, he'd have at least 5 months to start earning again. They could manage. Hopefully the girls would understand. Even though he was starting to come to terms with the financial reality he'd be facing if Mr. Radwell was indeed about to fire him, Derek's hands were still shaking as he reached up to the door to Mr. Radwell's office to knock. Come in and take a seat, came Radwell's voice, and Derek did as instructed. Glancing at Radwell, who was looking down at some paperwork, Derek took note of what his boss was wearing. Can I ask you where you buy your ties? The girls were asking about Father's Day presents, and Linda always thought I looked fetching in a tie. Derek was aware that his forced smile wasn't particularly convincing. Radwell's eyes, fortunately, remained locked to the paperwork in front of him. Maybe some emotional manipulation could make a difference. Derek, I presume from your absurd behavior this afternoon that you've figured out that we're letting you go. Effective immediately. I'll do what I can as far as a severance package, but it won't be much. Radwell's words bluntly smashed their way through Derek's feeble efforts to prepare himself for the worst. Derek managed. So I should... He gestured to the door. Immediately? Radwell still didn't look up. You'll get something in the mail, he said. Feeling as though he'd donated 2 pints of blood, Derek slowly and awkwardly lifted himself from the chair and somehow managed not to trip over himself on his way back to his desk. To what used to be his desk. There weren't many personal things to gather, just the photograph. If he was supposed to say something to everyone, he didn't feel like it. Stuffing the picture into his bag, he started for the door. No one looked up. He'd gone about 10 paces when he remembered something and stopped, turning back. He pulled open the drawer of his old desk and pulled out the printout with the job posting on it, rereading the first few lines of it before stuffing it into his bag. Skilled AV technician wanted. Must believe in ghosts and be capable of carrying at least 85 pounds.